So I'm here today with Eric Stein. I'm privileged to be meeting you, Eric, over from Penn University. Good evening to you.
Well, good evening. It's a pleasure to be here, Peter.
And for those that haven't bumped into his work before, Eric has written two books recently. One that's aimed really predominantly at fostering creativity in oneself and how that links to organisational behaviour. And the other one is really a sort of a deep dive in teams and how that links to organisational improvement. Would you like to tell us something of the essences of those books in a nutshell, of course?
Absolutely. Thanks, Peter. And again, thank you for the invite here. It's a pleasure to be here with you. So yeah, just briefly. I had the ideas for these books a number of years ago, and I started thinking about, what do we know about creative expression? And although there are a number of books, have been written about how to be creative and so on, many of them focus on the cognitive aspects, how we think, brainstorming, and so on. And I think there's a lot more to it than that. I'm in the business school, so in the end, it's really the actions that we take that matter. So this is a very behavioral-oriented approach, and so the books break the same theme, but they break into two parts. The first part is on individual development, as you mentioned. So really, we're trying to help individuals reach their creative potential in four key areas. The first one is improvisation, which I can explain in more depth in a little bit, if you'd like. Design proficiency. The third one is experimentation and tinkering. The fourth is developing aesthetic awareness. And kind of the foundation for that is building on your strengths to develop those particular areas of creative behavior. So that's really the essence of the first book. And the person looking at that can not only learn a little bit more about those activities, but I wanted to explode the myth that people are born creative, and those, if you're not born creative, you're not creative. And I think that's a huge myth. Maybe it's an excuse for those of us who are afraid to be creative initially, but the fact is that anyone can be creative in any area, but the differentiating factor is how much time are we willing to commit to it. So it's really more a matter of commitment than genetics.
Yeah, I'm very much with you on the view that we all have the potential to be creative. I don't believe in the creative gene, which some of my MBA students sort of apologise and say, of course, I'm not the creative one because I have no score in that department. But it's like a muscle, and you're suggesting that perhaps it's a muscle that can be exercised, and with some basic talent, everyone can access this. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, they say it takes 10,000 hours if you look at their work of Herbert Simon, the Nobel laureate, and then more recently, books like Blink and so on really look at how long does it take to become really, really expert in something, and creativity builds on expertise, and it's going to take you several thousand hours to become really good at something. But if you make the commitment, that's when you start to see all the unique possibilities that a domain affords. And yes, absolutely, it's a matter of just working really hard. Not to say there are truly gifted people out there who are extraordinary. Howard Gardner profiles them like Mozart and Einstein and so on. But we don't have to attain that level of expertise and creativity to be really effective in this world. And so you're absolutely right. I mean, same with my MBA students. At the beginning of the class, I ask them, I say, hey, how many of you think you're creative? And maybe 20% of the hands, 25% of the hands go up, and then, and then we look at that, and after the semester's over, about 3/4 of the hands go up because they realize that what they think is creative, and what they've actually been doing is very creative. They just didn't know it.
Yes, indeed. I mean, this is one of the interesting traps is how you define yourself. I know you cover that in the book, is whether you believe yourself to be creative or whether you impose blockages upon yourself that stop you somehow. So that's an interesting part of the book. I mean, another thing that you do deal with is the question, is there a demand for creativity? I hear thousands of people saying, we live in a more chaotic world, and therefore the only advantage competitively is to adapt, improvise, and learn. And I think the learning organisation concept maybe came about 20 years too early, because I think Peter Senge and his friends were ignored. I mean, what for you are the drivers that say that really now we do have a demand and a need for creativity in the world and in organisations?
Oh, great question. I think we, as a group or as a society or business group, we suffer from a creative skills gap. And what I mean by that is that there's a shortage of creative people to build the really extraordinary, that requires the extraordinary kind of creative output required for really great products and services. You see great companies like Google and Apple and so on, which consistently pump out creative products and services, and it's because they hire great people, but they also recognize what creativity is in all its forms. So I think you're absolutely right. I'm a big fan of the learning organization, Senge's work, and prior to that, Chris Ardress, Don Schoen's work, which kind of was the foundation that Senge built on, and it's terrific because, and yes, I agree, it's it was way before its time. I think there's several reasons. Let me give you at least five. I mean, if you look at the environmental texture, there's increasingly complexity in the world. We can now, through all the social media that we use, manage relationships with exponentially more people than we could before. That takes that's quite a challenge. I think that's even more important than the rapid rate of change. We talk about that, but I think it's environmental complexity, which is really the challenge, and we have to be creative in managing that. I think also that so consequently, people's task environment, with the jobs that they do, there are no black and white answers. You can't prescribe everything. You can't just everything's not according to plan. You have to be able to adapt in real time, and that's what improvisation is. It's real time decision making, and I think we can learn from musicians in that regard. I know you'll resonate with that. I think then when we go to the next level, teams and teams have become networked throughout global supply chains, and I think that's really critical on managing those relationships and building those teams effectively across boundaries across the globe are really a challenge. I think leaders need to understand too. One of the problems is that leaders don't fully understand what it means to be creative, much less manage creative people, and I think that's also there's a need there. And so I think there are several reasons why we need to one, define creativity, and two, help individuals become more adept at and hone their creative, have opportunities for creative skills. I just wanted to add one other thing. I mean, I think there's a shared burden here in terms of the universities as well as businesses. The universities, I don't think have I think we can do a better job at providing opportunities for creative outcomes for our students. We're highly structured. We provide structured learning environments, but to think outside the box, quote unquote, requires working without a net. And I don't think we give students enough opportunity to do that. I've had a number of students say, "Gee, until I took your course, I really didn't feel I could exercise my creativity." And it's a real compliment, but I think it's telling. I think we need to provide more unstructured opportunities. As well as structured ones to exercise creativity, and then I think secondarily, of course, once these young people get into business, they're not given that opportunity, and unfortunately, managers and leaders don't really know what creativity is, and nor do they know how to compensate for it. So I think there's some real critical issues here, even at the definitional level.
We'll have to edit this bit out. Are you still there?
I'm still here, yeah. Hopefully that we didn't lose each other.
Well, I lost you, but we'll find out afterwards, and the power of editing might have to allow us.
Okay.
We'll put a silent bit in there or a video.
All right. Are we still? Do you have me back now?
Yeah, we're all back. Yeah. So
okay.
Perhaps just run me past the last bit of that.
Okay. Well. I think I'm not sure where we stopped, but I think I was talking about
stuff and how they can really help. You were talking about that a bit.
I'm sorry, I missed that last thing. Say again.
You were talking about how universities can really help to sort of develop this capacity and give people more unstructured opportunities. Was one of where we left off, I think.
Okay, yeah, just to follow up, I think there's two places we need to provide opportunities for creative expression, and I think, the university can do a better job at helping students to exercise their creative expression, through activities that include design, improvisation, and so on. You get that in the engineering schools, but you don't always get it in business school. We provide highly structured environments and tend to pour, our knowledge into our students. We need to relax those constraints and really give them the opportunity to discover on their own some of this knowledge. And I think we can do a better job at that. And then next, I think I spoke about getting into, when you take a job, and especially young people when they start a job, they're not given the opportunity to exercise their creative talents either initially or maybe over a long period of time. Oftentimes leaders and management don't even understand what it means to be creative, so they don't even know how to compensate or incentivize folks. I had a student who, most of our students are working professionals, and she sort of bemoaned the fact that she was doing creative work, but they didn't understand that her work was very, very creative, and it really was. And so she wasn't being, recognized for that under on her annual reviews, and that's a shame. We need to do a better job at both understanding what is and then incentivizing it.
That sounds a bit like when I say to my wife doesn't understand me, but we're going to pass on from that to just say we're having a huge agreement about all of this, which is good, I suppose. Hopefully we won't fall out during the interview, but over here, many of our business schools are absolutely they're a bit worried about creativity. I actually went to Cambridge a little while ago, and they're, particularly in the recession, they're really worried about creativity. And I pointed out to them that creativity may have helped. Well, no, I pointed out that creativity did not cause the crash. It was gambling, which is mindless improvisation, rather than
Mm-hmm.
mindful creativity that's got some degree of structures, which leads us on to the question of improvisation, which you mentioned just earlier on. And yes, you're going to find a very receptive audience here. So, as I also play instruments, as you can probably guess. So, tell me a little bit, because you talk a lot about sort of science, experimentation, and improvisation. So, something about that, please.
Absolutely. Well, I want to address your point about improvisation and this fear of improvisation that if somehow led to the stock crash or the things falling. That's also one of the fallacies of improvisation, is that it's just making up. The French have a word for this, it's called bricolage, which is just sort of patch a bunch of things together, in the moment. And it's a wonderful idea, but that's not improvisation. Improvisation is born out of many years of training and becoming proficient in a domain so that you can actually react in real time to changes, in, say, the music around you, or if it's firefighters and, a moving fire line. So that comes from years and years of training in highly structured conditions. So improvisation is more about the development of patterns and modifying those patterns to meet environmental conditions. And so, it really couldn't be farther from the truth. Whatever took place on Wall Street or wherever, to cause the stock market to crash, is not the result of improvisation. That's, as you suggested, gambling. So there's this kind of myth about what improv is, and it's not that at all. It really takes years and years of hard work to become an effective improviser. And you look at it, whether it be jazz or whether it be doctors improvise all the time. They have to sometimes because they can't anticipate all the conditions. So improvisation is real-time decision-making in complex situations, and so I think we need to become better at that. The only way to do that is to practice being in those contexts where the risk is low, and then so that when we're in a high-risk context, we can be most effective. So, yeah. Anyway, so I have a lot to say about improv. I don't know if I should keep going on that. I can talk about my background or music and so
We'll
on.
come on to that, I think, in a little bit. But I mean, we were talking in the run-up to this interview. I played a gig on Wednesday night with a chap called Bernie Tormey. In fact, I've got his T-shirt on still. And he played with Ozzy Osbourne and a number of people, and we
Sure.
did a band together. And there was this moment where he was playing a solo, and I second-guessed where he would go with it from a degree of experience of having been around him for long.
Sure.
And I guessed correctly in this case, so I put in a harmony. I just thought, I know what he's going to do next.
Right.
And I think that plays exactly to your point of practice and lots of hours and knowing patterns and being able to sort of just see a few seconds ahead, or even less than a second perhaps in this case, and thinking, I know where that's going. I think that's poorly understood by business managers. They think that improvisation is random, dangerous, and all of those words that go around it. I mean, do you want to say a little bit more about how that works in a business context and how you get people to trust a little more experimentation?
Yeah, I mean, here's a great example. Johnson and Johnson, when they had to recall Tylenol, was a huge crisis. It was a real-time crisis. They had to manage, and I thought business history has judged them that they managed it well. They immediately pulled it. They had full disclosure and so on, and they've become a model for that sort of thing. Whether they practiced it or not, they did it right. But it was because they had the skill to manage in a crisis, a real-time situation, that they were effective at it. And I think, as you said, you got to practice to become good at this. I mean, that's why people take improv classes, and they're deathly afraid to be in front of folks. I'm a jazz musician, and the first time I had to take a solo, I was deathly afraid of playing the wrong note. And then you realize, as Miles said, there are no wrong notes. It's just a matter of your commitment to them. Then but after, over time you start to learn what you can do with the notes, and it's a language. You're learning a language, and whether it be rock and roll or jazz or even classical, the early classical composers were improvisers. They improvised a lot, Mozart in particular. So the idea here is that you need to practice, and then you can see the possibilities, and you can react in real time. I grew up in a musical house, so my dad was a jazz musician, and I've played jazz for a number of years. I have a jazz gig coming up on November 15th, just outside Philadelphia, where I live, and I love it. It's just that thrill of, can you do what you want to do in the moment and respond to, and that's where it gets interesting when you're on a team. There's so many lessons for teams here. How do you respond to the players, because they're providing the context, and I think that it's no different in business.
And if you are on in the moment, emotional intelligence takes on a real strong meaning, because you can be a master of your own competence, of what living inside your own head and all those things that Garden talks about. But a really good musician and really good leaders, I think, have these things open, and they pay attention to what's around them, so they can actually take a direction that hasn't been, see it, listen to other people. It's the old thing, we have one mouth and two ears, and we should use them in that proportion. And I've seen great musicians do that, and I think great leaders is, for me, a direct parallel that you have the excellence inside, but also the intrapersonal awarenesses and things like that make you able to get other people to do things with you.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, listening is so critical here, and being able to react in the moment to something. As you start to understand jazz, just like what you did, you heard, and this happens in jazz all the time, a soloist, say a saxophonist, and if I were playing piano, if there's a good piano player playing, if the saxophonist starts to run a certain type of scale with a certain kind of underlying harmonic structure, even though it's not written down, the piano player would be right there immediately, and there'd be no question, and vice versa. If the pianist takes it in a slightly different harmonic direction, the rest of the band, the bass player will go with them, the soloist will be inspired, and it all is happening on this very fast, very subtle level that is a marvel.
But this is all tacit knowledge, isn't it? It's sort of understood rather than written down on scores. And tomorrow night, with a bit of luck, I'm interviewing Maceo Parker, James Brown's horn player. So I want to find out from him whether the academics are right about this pre-hearing and joining in. So I'll probably be asking him something about that, I hope. Now, moving on to, this is not a business. This is not a book or series of books that are purely academic. Like all good business schools, you end with practicalities for the busy manager who says, "Okay, I want to improvise, but I want to get it right." So you talk about practical aesthetics. Would you like to sort of give us a little insight into that?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last word. Practical what?
Aesthetics.
Aesthetics.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess so. Let's take it into the business context. I mean, here's the question, really, the critical question. When was the last time, if you're in business, your client said your products are beautiful, or that service was beautiful. You know,
Mm.
that's a real telling comment. And if people perceive your products or services beautiful, you're really doing something extraordinary. And that's what aesthetics is about. Aesthetic is about connecting with our perceptions, our feelings, our emotions, and ultimately our judgment. About beauty, and beauty comes in all different forms. So, to think that aesthetics is divorced from product development is crazy. I mean, developing a great product has to include aesthetic considerations. I mean, there were 200 MP3 players before the iPod came out. Why did they pick the iPod? Because it was beautiful. I mean, it was the most beautiful one out there. In addition to having great functionality, so both form and function go together in design, and great companies, benefit from great design. And if you look at all the great companies today, they're great designers, at heart. And they encourage design in all its forms. And so, the aesthetic component and the functional component go hand in hand. You're never going to be great in what you do unless you're in an area that requires almost no design, and that's very rare. I have a student recently who was worked for a company that did industrial pipe fittings, and you think, well, who cares about aesthetics there? And yet he brought in all these fantastic images of these beautiful, really beautiful, artistic industrial designs that this company was able to present their clients with these industrial pipe fittings, and it was extraordinary. It looked like something out of a Dr. Seuss book. It was amazing. And so aesthetics is important to pretty much every industry. Service industries too. I mean, the way you craft an experience. Think of a great meal. I mean, a great meal is an orchestrated moment, and it can be beautiful.
So just get an expert opinion on this one. My kids tell me that it's all over at Apple now because they've become too corporate and they're not as cool as they were.
Sure.
And of course, it is true that companies have their S curve in terms of their success. So, what would you suggest Apple do now to keep ahead, or do they need to do anything?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I think everyone's waiting for that bust-out, disruptive kind of, new business model. I mean, what's extraordinary about Apple has been the ability, and it was primarily Steve Jobs,
Mm.
was able to not only produce a game-changing product or service, but to change the rules of the game. And I think they haven't done that for a while, And I think that's because building an MP3 player. So what? It's building something that can change. So they've come out with Apple Pay, and I think that's certainly a promising move on their part. But in terms of the iPhone, they're tinkering around the edges. They're making modifications. So, in the words of Clay Christensen, they're doing incremental innovation at the moment, and I think that's important too. But uh, what advice would I give them? I the common thought would be to take more risk. I think they just have to examine their assumptions and just continue to look for fat, bloated markets, where there's a lot of greed. I mean, I think that's where opportunity is in greedy markets, and as they start to I think looking for those, and Apple or any company, that can find and attack those markets. I'll give you another example. There's a company that it's called the Dollar Shave Club, which I was skeptical of, so they offer a razor for a dollar a month, but I love it. It's totally disruptive. They do offer a razor. It's $2 shipping and handling the first go around, but essentially you get this completely disruptive, and they did amazing social media marketing, and they jumped to $60 million within a year or so. But they kind of tinkered around with and attacked a market that frankly the plastic to do razors is pretty cheap, and so they attacked a market that I think was a little bit lazy and a little bit was a little bit greedy, and they've done extremely well. I think they're actually being and there's more and more like that. So I think any market that's a little bit subject to greed is an opportunity.
Yeah, I think laziness is often a killer in corporate life. As soon as you've won, I used to work a lot down at Pfizer, and a few years ago when they were number one, I said to them, who are you going to compete with now?
Hmm.
Because you're number one. Well, we don't need to worry. I said, I think you need to be thinking about to compete outside your sector, and of course they're now not number one anymore. They're not doing bad, but the only way is down. Once you get rest up on the sofa, you're
Yes.
in trouble. And Richard Branson goes into lazy markets, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And just cleans up. He's more an adapter rather than in the most part, but he finds things that need shaking up, and that seems to be so. Apple being the top, I suppose they've got to think about how they remain there.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
sorry.
No, I was just going to say, the last chapter of the second book, the Designing Creative, High-Powered Teams and Organizations, is the last chapter is called, Remaining Paranoid and Other Important Thoughts. So it's about remaining paranoid. Once you start to get complacent, that's the beginning of the end.
Yeah. Okay, so how do people get hold of you and your books and your speaking and everything else you do around the world? How do we get hold of you?
Well, sure. So the first thing is, I have a Twitter feed. It's Eric Stein, PhD. You can get me on the web. My website is either ericsteinphd.com or ericwstein.com. Either place will take you there. I have a YouTube channel. It's youtube.com, Eric Stein, PhD. And I have a Skype handle that you can ring me if you'd like. It's CIRE3500. So many ways to get a hold of me, and I'd love to hear from people. I also have another website which is called ideasmethod.com, which features focuses on the books and the method itself that underlies both books. And there's some tips and some I have a companion workbook that I'm about to you asked about practical applications of this, so I'll be making that available shortly. So working on continue to work on this, and love to continue the conversation with whoever finds meaning in it.
And I see that really like what you're saying. That you have the beginner's mind in terms of sort of as soon as you finish something, you start over and produce something new, because that's the way actually to stay fresh. Or in my book, that sounds like a Virgin from Madonna. But the beginner's mind, I think, is so important if you're particularly as you gain more expertise. So I like to see that you're actually applying that in a business school, because that, I think, keeps the business school fresh as well.
Yeah, no, I try. I agree. Yeah, always trying to recreate something. For myself, I mean, I get bored easily, so I'm always looking for the next thing.
And I know from our previous conversation that you sometimes take a jazz band into the lecture seminar, which is my kind of lecture. So I'm really, I'd love us to. So thank you for this initial jam over online. I'd like one day for us to get in the same room and see if we can actually play some riffs together and stuff, and see how we get on. But we'll get over the Atlantic one way or the other. So thank you very much, Eric, for this hangout, and we'll be putting it up on YouTube shortly for those that couldn't drop in tonight. And thank you again for this.
Well, thank you, Peter, and yeah, I look forward to jamming with you. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay. Thanks for now.
All right. Take care. Thank you again.